If you've been with us, we've been in Word and Witness series, and does anyone like parties? Did you party on Thanksgiving? Was it did you guys throw down on Thanksgiving? Was it crazy? No? No hootenannies, no keggers, no box socials, nothing like that? Just plain old turkey, okay? I'm sorry, but parties are awesome, right? And you're probably gonna go to a couple Christmas parties. Some of you have parties at work coming up, don't you? Some of you guys have work parties. Some of you guys have family parties. You're going to have white elephant parties. I don't know what other sorts of parties you can have, but you're going to have a lot of different parties. We're having a volunteer party. Hope you can make it. There's lots of parties. I like parties. My favorite party, can you tell I'm excited? One of my favorite parties, I was 10 years old, and they don't have this place anymore, and it is a shame. It's a crime against humanity. It doesn't exist. This place called Qzar. Yeah. Qzar was the most epic laser tag of all time, okay? I mean, it was tuck, jump, and roll. It's not little kiddie laser tag. I mean, it was no holds bar. There wasn't contact or anything like that, but it was serious. My 10th birthday, my mom brought me there, and she surprised me. We had all my friends were there. I was the guest of honor, and I remember my favorite gift. I opened this gift up, and it was a little red and black basketball, and I opened the little basketball, and there was a Michael Jordan watch in there. I'm telling you, I don't know if Mike probably wore it. I don't know. I like to think he wore that watch. And it was just a beautiful, wonderful watch. It was the most amazing gift. Now, I want you to do this. I want you to think back to your favorite party. Not just the party you enjoyed, but a party that was about you, that was in your honor. So think back maybe to your wedding. Think back maybe to your favorite birthday party or going away party or work party where you got an award. Think back to one of those moments. Because our text today was actually set at a giant party. Now, reading it doesn't sound like there's a party going on, but there actually is a giant party. And this party is called the Feast of the Booths. Now, when we think about the Feast of the Booths, and you hear this word booth, you're probably thinking like a block party or a farmer's market or something like that. But there's another word for this is actually the Feast of the Tabernacle, the Feast of the Tabernacles. Now, what was this? Well, this was held at the end of all the fall celebrations. This giant party was held kind of in the end of October, early November. It was held there, and it was held at the end of the agricultural year. So none of us probably are in agriculture, maybe a couple of us, okay? A lot of us work in tech, and you harvest silicon. You don't harvest grapes, okay? But back then, they would celebrate the agricultural year, right? They would celebrate. They'd be excited about it. And so the grapes and the olives were as big as your head at this point. They were huge. They were done growing. And so they would celebrate. They would look back and say, God, thank you for this wonderful time, this harvest. And also let us look forward and pray for a good rainy season, because if there was a good rainy season, then the Feast of the Booths would be even more crazy the next year. Okay, that's the sort of party it was. But there was actually a deeper, more important meaning behind the Feast of the Booths or the Feast of the Tabernacles. This party was originally meant to look backwards at a time where Israel, the people of God, were journeying out of Egypt. And so when they came out of Egypt, they were freed from oppression. And so in the Hebrew Scriptures, this is a very important part of the Bible. They would look back and remember the story where Moses freed Israel out of captivity by God's power, and they were journeying in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, the 40 years part they weren't so happy about. But they did journey, and God did free them. And one day, he did deliver them to the promised land he would bring them. That's the land they're currently in. And so what they would do is they would look back at this time. Now, the way they did this was they would build a booth. They would build a booth. Do you have a picture? So this is what kind of a modern day, but more of a maybe like mid-century or I guess mid-millennium style booth would look like, okay? When we think of booth, we think of people that sell cheap jewelry in the middle of the mall. This is more of like, if you sell jewelry, I love you, I'm sorry. This is kind of something they lived in. Think more of like a tent. They would pitch a tent, make a tent, and they would live in it for a whole week. And they did it to remember what God or what the people of Israel did in God's presence back in the wilderness. We actually have a modern picture of it as well. This is kind of what it looks like in modern day. And so I got a little more fancy, you know what I'm saying? So if you can kind of picture this kind of looks like an outdoor hotel. That's where they lived. And then out of that are these booths. And these booths or these tents, they're a little bit more modern. I wonder if they run electricity into them now. I don't know. But they're really, really nice. And they would do this in remembrance of exactly what Israel did, because they would have to pitch these tents along the way on their journey, spending 40 years in the wilderness. And so they would symbolically remember God's faithfulness in this deliverance. But for this party, it didn't just look backwards. So they're remembering something, But this party doesn't just look back, it also points forward to something greater. You see, this party points forward to one day a man coming through the kingly line of their father David, who would one day come and make all things right. You see, they know that sin separates them from God, and they've got sin. And so they're longing for this guy to come back, a king, and would reconcile and renew and restore the world so that they can be in right relationship with God. They were looking forward. Now, fast forward to our time in the book. We know that Jesus is here. All of us, some of us, we believe that Jesus is God, that he was this coming Messiah, this coming king that would one day redeem, renew, and restore the world, right? We knew that. And so we know that Jesus is the seed of Abraham. He's the king that came from the line of David. This is Jesus. So fundamentally, this party that they're celebrating is actually about Jesus. It's about the coming Messiah. This party right here, they're hosting it, and they're having this thought about this guy coming. Now, just look at verse 1 for me. Here's the state of this party. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee, but he would not go about in Judea. That's where the party is, okay? Because the Jews were seeking to kill him. My goodness. So now the Jews' feast of the booths was at hand. Question, how would you expect to be treated at that party I made you imagine? How would you like to be treated? How were you treated at your wedding? Now, when I was talking to my wife, I remember everyone stood up when the bride walks in, right? No one looks at the groom. They all take their eyes off the groom, and they all go to the beautiful woman wearing all white, debonair, was that a word? I don't know, walking down the aisle. Everyone's excited, and it's just so much beauty. They're captivated at her, right? My 10-year-old party, man, amazing. Everyone's looking at me. I've got the watch. They love me, right? It's just fantastic. But imagine trying to sneak your way into your own party. Anyone ever try to kill you at your own party? Imagine a bride sneaking into her own party because a few of the bridesmaids are going to try to kill her. Like later, we're going to get her tonight. This is the night. And they're going to kill her. Imagine that. Imagine a 10-year-old having to sneak his way into the ball pit and hide at his own party because a couple 10-year-olds have some BB guns trying to end him. That's what's happening to Jesus. He has to sneak into his party to avoid murderous guests at his own feast. That's what's actually happening. Now, Jesus is going to have to state his case. He's going to have to state his case for why he's worthy of being the object of this party. That's what he's going to do, and that's what we're going to talk about. And in so doing, there's actually much we can learn ourselves about how we interact with Jesus himself even today. And here's the first thing Jesus is going to have to do. Jesus is going to have to speak for himself in a world that tries to speak for him. He's going to have to speak for himself in a world that tries to speak for him. Do you think people put words in Jesus' mouth today? Perhaps. Look at verse 3. So his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea." His brothers are talking to Jesus. "That your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for not even his brothers believed him." Wait a second. These are Jesus, not his brothers. These are his actual brothers. This is his family. These are the people that grew up in the same house as Jesus, his younger brothers, okay? Jesus had younger half-brothers. And so he's talking to his brothers, and his brothers say to him, "Jesus, if you want people to know whatever you think you're saying, why don't you just head up and tell them? It's not that big of a deal, Jesus." How are they talking to him? Kind of like he's his brother. Probably not like they're talking to God, right? So what does this demonstrate about his brothers? They don't really understand who Jesus is. I mean, imagine getting in a fight with God about a decision he's making. "God, listen, you just need to figure this out. I read a few books, I watched a few TV shows. You just need to go in there and tell him you're God. You'll be fine." Imagine saying that to God. You would be like crazy. And by the way, his brothers probably had a hint this guy might be something special. I mean, imagine any time they got in a fight growing up, and Jesus is like got his brother in a headlock. And the brother would be mad, and he'd be like, "Well, I don't know, guess whose fault it is? It's yours. I don't sin. You need to figure it out." Okay? Jesus is always right in every argument, and they still don't understand it. They ordered God around, and they failed to understand the real weight of the situation. Jesus was weighing his options here. Now, many of us actually do the same thing, believe it or not. We sometimes determine how God is supposed to act in a specific situation in our lives, don't we? We determine that God is supposed to do something, and if he doesn't do it, then he's wrong or he should have been there. And we get angry, we get depressed, we get sad, and we have this preconceived idea of how God's going to behave. He's going to give me the job. He's going to give me the work. I need to survive. He's going to give me the family, the husband, the wife. He's going to give these things to me. And when he gives them to me, then I'll be happy. And if he doesn't, I'm sad. We often speak for God. We think God is supposed to give us something because, I don't know, I guess I haven't thought about it that deeply. Angry, depressed, apathetic toward God. We often speak for him in situations where God never said he would speak. Now, there's this old trick, maybe some of you have heard of it, where a professor would come into a room with chalk, and this is back when they had chalk in classrooms, and he would come and say, if God is real, this chalk, I will drop it on the floor, and God will keep it from breaking. He'll catch it, and it will fall safely to the ground, and it won't break, and therefore we'll know God is real. But if he doesn't, and it breaks, God is not real. And so the professor often will drop the chalk, it'll shatter on the ground, and he'll go, see, told you God's not real. Now, what does this say about God? Does it mean he's not real? Well, no. I mean, all it does is prove God's not a circus animal willing to jump through hoops for somebody. That's all it proves. God never said he wasn't going to break the chalk. He didn't say anything. So we're making an argument and speaking for God in this situation where God's actually not trying to speak. Now, let's let God speak and let's see how he responds. Verse 6, Jesus said to them, talking to his brothers, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. And after saying this, he remained in Galilee. So what does Jesus say? He says, actually, I think I'll just do what I want to do. I think you're wrong. It's not my time, so I'm going to stay. God speaks for himself. You know, we often misunderstand God's mission. God actually has a plan for what he's trying to do, and we often actually take God out of that mission and place him into like a very private, personal American life. And we think now that God's mission isn't his mission, it's our mission. So God becomes whatever we want him to become for our lives. And so, God, if you're going to give me the house, you give me the house. If you're going to give me the money, give me the money. God, if you're going to keep me out of harm's way and keep me healthy, keep me healthy. And when he doesn't do those things, we say, God, what are you doing? And God's like, I'm not on that mission with you. I might be, but sometimes I'm not. I'm on my mission. We think Jesus is here to conquer our enemies, but he's here to conquer his enemy, the great enemy, which is also our greatest enemy. We have to remember that Jesus is ultimately here to conquer the ultimate enemy, not just to conquer our daily demons. That's what he's here for. Now, he absolutely can minister to you in those times, but his mission, we need to link up with his mission instead of getting him to link up with our mission. Make sense? This is what else Jesus has got to do. Jesus gives his qualifications into a world that's unqualified. Jesus gives his qualifications to a world that is unqualified. Look at verse 14 with me. About the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. Wait a sec, I thought he wasn't going. Sometimes we do that, right? We jump the gun. Oh, God's not coming. He's not going to be here. I knew it. My friends they told me that God would not show up, and he didn't show up. I knew it. Why did I even believe? I'm so ridiculous. Oh, wait, here's God. It just took a little time. He had to do it on his timing. And so Jesus shows up at this party in verse 14. Verse 15 says, the Jews therefore marveled because Jesus was teaching in the temple. He went smack dab to the temple. He wasn't hiding in a ball pit. He went straight for the middle of this party. And the Jews therefore marveled, saying, how is it that this man has learning when he has never studied? Imagine saying that to God. Traditional channels did not authorize Jesus to be teaching what he was teaching in the way he was teaching it. So people wanted to know his source of insight and his source of authority. That's what they were looking for. Now, in his day, in order to be up in the temple, you needed to be this very, very high-ranking rabbi. And you needed years of formal theological and rabbinical training. You needed to be learning underneath another rabbi for about 12 years. And then once you could begin to teach, you could teach, but you could only refer to your authorities as commentary. You weren't able to give your own commentary yet because you had not yet earned it. And once you had earned your stripes over years and years and years of teaching publicly, then and only then could you add a little bits and pieces of your commentary into a message. But Jesus isn't doing that. Jesus gets up day one and he's preaching hard. And he is giving them the true message. He's going back to the Hebrew scriptures and he's pointing out all of the signs that are pointing to him. He is going hard. And so they're looking at him and they're going, this guy's not qualified. we've set up qualifications, and Jesus hasn't met those qualifications. He shouldn't be there. They're missing the point. They're looking at something completely wrong. They're not even listening to what Jesus is saying. They're just checking their calculators and their watches going, oh, these are not supposed to be up there. They've missed it. Verse 16, Jesus answers them. I love how Jesus answers people. Always just, he wants to answer. My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. He said that before. Over the last few weeks, we've studied different passages. Over the course of the last, in the text is a few months, where Jesus has been saying, this is not my teaching, it is from somebody else. If anyone's will is to do God's will, then he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether if I'm speaking on my own authority. The one who speaks on his own authority, or speaks on his own authority, seeks his own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. Jesus has been referring back, all the way back to chapter 1, been telling people, this is not my teaching, this is the teaching of the Father. And then what else is he saying? If you can hear what I'm saying to you and you believe this, then you'll know that my teaching is not from me, it's from God the Father. That's what he keeps saying. Furthermore, what does a rabbi teach people about? Do you guys know? What does a rabbi teach people about? What does a pastor teach people about? They're supposed to teach people about God, right? That's what they're supposed to teach people about. They're supposed to teach people about God. Who is Jesus? He's God. Do you understand how ridiculous this is? Jesus doesn't need to learn about God. He is God. He doesn't need to spend years of rabbinical trading trying to understand the tricks of the trade of who he is. He just knows. He's him. He is God. The Bible scripture says, I and the Father are one. Jesus has been giving the same answer over and over and over again. And essentially what he's telling people is, listen, if you read the scriptures, you'll know they testify about me. If you don't get that, you don't understand the Hebrew scriptures. He's trying to tell them, if you look back and read the Old Testament and you don't see that the Old Testament is pointing forward to the Messiah, Jesus, then you don't understand the Old Testament. That's what he's trying to tell them. He's trying to make it very, very, very clear to them. And this is how he proves it out. He wants to prove it. Verse 19. Check this out. You got that? Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? Wait a second. All the Jewish people, the people of Israel are going to this party and you love the law, right? But you don't keep the law? Okay, so why are you mad at me? You don't even keep the law. You're trying to kill me. I'm just teaching it. You can't even follow it. He's putting it on their own standard. He's saying, you don't even fit your own standard. That's what he's saying here. You know, many of us judge God. We've determined that he's wrong about suffering, that he's wrong about our circumstances, that he's wrong about injustice, he's wrong about the way we should live, but God is not giving us the opinions of what he thinks the way we should live. He's telling us, I created the world, this is how it goes. This is what he's trying to say. He's more than qualified to judge the world because he made the world. You understand? He's made the pot, he understands its use. He is not speculating like we do, because we're in the process of a human attempt trying to ascertain who God is. Revelation comes from God. He understands that this is directly from me. I made this myself. And so he's got all these crazy people kind of looking at him cockeyed. Why are you teaching? I don't know if I really believe in you. I mean, I've seen what you've done. Have you been there with God? I've seen what you've done. I've read the stories. I'm just not sure I believe in any of these things. Question, do you like people that are skeptical of you? Do you like when people look at you cockeyed when you're talking? And they're like, I don't know. And do you like when people are saying one thing with their mouth, but their eyes are clearly trying to communicate something completely different? Do you enjoy that? Isn't that fantastic? Especially when it's your in-laws. Isn't that fantastic? You don't like it, right? Neither does Jesus. Jesus also does not like people that are skeptical of him. Jesus also does not like it when people are second-guessing him and saying one thing with their mouths, but they're doing other things. He doesn't like that. And so if we find ourselves in that sort of relationship with God, we need to understand this, that there is no selfishness in Jesus. Jesus isn't selfish. There's no corruption in Jesus. We oftentimes look at people that are corrupt or maybe selling us something, and we get angry and we get skeptical. We just don't really trust them. Jesus isn't selling us anything. In fact, he gains nothing from it. In fact, it's actually going to cost him dearly. Jesus is actually paying a price for us, not selling us anything. Jesus is totally qualified to be able to give us this message. And here's the last thing. Jesus wants to do. He has to bring logic to a world that's all full of assumptions. He wants to bring logic to a world full of assumptions. A lot of people think it's actually backwards. A lot of people think that when they read the Bible, it's mostly a bunch of assumptions. And what we need to do is bring logic to the assumptions the scriptures make. Not so. It's the exact opposite. See, Jesus is bringing logic to a world full of assumptions because the word logic comes from the Greek word logos, which means the word, truth incarnate, truth with understanding. This word is actually fundamentally about Jesus. And so Jesus is bringing logic to a world full of assumptions. Look at verse 20. The crowd answered him, "You have a demon." So if you say anything to God, that's probably not it. Okay? You have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Like, they don't even see it. Who's seeking to kill you? Jesus answered him, "I did one work, and you guys are all marveling at it. You guys you're taking this way out of proportion. You saw it was crazy." Jesus looks at him and goes, No. You're the crazy one. You're the crazy one. Because if you've been with us the last few weeks, you know that people are trying to kill Jesus. We've read it in the narrative. You can read it in other Gospels. People are trying to kill Jesus. Jesus isn't making this up. He's not paranoid. We know people are trying to kill him. What happens is they hear Jesus talk, and the people who are listening, they just assume it. Oh, it's wrong. They assume it. We assume he's probably tripping. He's probably wrong, right? We read something about God says in the Bible, and oftentimes we assume too. We read something in the scriptures, and we're flipping through, and we go, that probably means this for me. And then we take that assumption. But God isn't about assumptions. He's very logical. Don't assume anything about the world. Don't assume. God's a logic. Don't assume. Study the scriptures. Seek for answers. Ask scholars. Ask pastors. Ask leaders. Ask teachers. Don't assume anything. Don't assume because you've heard one podcast or read one blog post that you have all the answers to the world. Don't assume it. Seek the answers. God says, ask and you will find. Seek, knock. That's what we need to do about Jesus. We should not be assuming things about God. Rather, we should be allowing God to tell us things about himself through logic. Now, Jesus is going to tease this out and actually prove this to them with logic. Okay? He's going to use a little Jedi mind trick. Okay? I guess Jedi, is that from God? I don't know. I don't watch that. Verse 22. Moses gave you circumcision. Not that it's from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcised a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? You see the logic there? Maybe you didn't catch that. I'll help tease this out for you. We read a couple weeks ago about how crazy religious people are about their Sabbath. The Jews were very, very crazy about their Sabbath. Remember, they would tie rope around their waist. They weren't allowed to go 1,000 yards from their tent or their tabernacle, and so they would tie that rope, and once the rope pulled taut, they were like, oh, can't go any farther. Okay, that's how much they cared about the Sabbath. But with this crazy rule, they allowed some work to happen. You see, the Hebrew Scriptures teach that you're supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day. Now, what happens if the circumcision falls, the 8th day falls on the Sabbath? That's quite the conundrum. Does this work or not? And here's what they did. They allowed it. They're like, this is probably fine. God calls people to be circumcised on the 8th day. Even though it's the Sabbath, he calls no one to work. I'm just going to probably assume that this is all good. Now, what was circumcision? What was it for? And not exactly, not like literally what it was, okay? But what was it for? It was so that an unclean Israelite, a man, would be able to be spiritually clean in for God's presence. It was a sign, a symbol, that this person was a man of Israel, that he could possibly be changed and transformed by God. He was one of God's children. So circumcision is what made men spiritually fit to be in God's presence, okay? So if circumcision is what makes man to be spiritually fit in God's presence, and Jesus makes a man literally fit in God's presence by healing his legs, why is that not allowable? But this is. You see what Jesus did? You don't know what you're talking about. That's what he said. And he didn't use any sort of godlike force to do this. He just told them the truth. Guys, you don't understand what you're talking about. The arguments about the Sabbath and Jesus and the commingling and how wrong Jesus was about the Sabbath are all superficial. They're all superficial. The Israelites did not understand the Sabbath. Jesus understands the Sabbath, and he drops it on them. You guys need to learn something, okay? They assumed they were right, but they hadn't really looked at the logic of their own assumptions. So my question for you is, what ideas have you assumed about God that if you studied and really saw what God was trying to say, that you'd be wrong? What have you assumed about God that may not be true under further investigation? Think about it. What do you think God is telling you? Oh, God says this action is fine, this behavior is fine, this is fine. I'm just going to be able to do this or do that or think this. What is it that you're assuming about God? Or maybe, what do you know God is telling you, but you're just not looking deeply enough because you're fearful that you might find the answer you don't want to hear? We often do that, right? In relationships, if we don't want to bring a specific thing up in the relationship, we will just tiptoe around it, right? And so maybe you're in a spot where if you're a Christian, you avoid certain parts of Scripture because you know what they might say, and they might collide and contradict with your social, political, sexual worldview. They might collide, and you have to go, man, I got to make a decision about this. Or maybe you're not a Christian at all, and you're thinking, you're just thumbing through the Bible, and you're like, man, I just don't want to thumb too much because I just don't want to know as much. Maybe I can have plausible deniability if I just don't read enough of this. Maybe that's what we're looking for. What idea have you assumed about God that wouldn't be logical if you looked more closely? We must look past the superficial arguments about Jesus. If you've got a superficial argument holding you back from believing God, you need to do some research and lay that superficial argument down, because God wants us to get into the meat and potatoes of him, right? He's not interested in asparagus or any of these vegetables, like these superficial arguments. He wants the meat. Sorry, vegans, okay? That's what he wants. Now, just to prove this point just a little bit further, here's what the law of Moses, the circumcision, the Sabbath, and these Feast of the Booths were all really about. Yes, they look back. Yes, they're about a relationship between God then and with them in that day and time, but they also were looking forward, like we said. God made a promise to Abraham one day that Abraham, even though his wife couldn't conceive, that one day he would bring a seed through his line, and that seed would one day redeem and renew and restore the world. And now Abraham and Sarai, his wife, they were 100 years old. They couldn't conceive. This guy's crazy. But that was the promise he made. And no matter what Abraham and his children's behavior was like, he determined himself to make that happen. He also made a promise to David, King David. And he told David that one day through his kingly line, he would bring a better king. He would bring a king that would be benevolent, loving, kind, but also sovereign and powerful, that would redeem Israel for good and bring about the culmination of this great kingdom so that they could rule in a wonderful land. That's what he promised them. Now, this guy, Jesus, is the answer. He is the seed, and he is the king. Jesus is both of those things, and he's at this party, and nobody knows it, even his own family, that this is the guy. Jesus is in your life right now being king and being the seed, and you might be missing him. And he might be on the tabernacle, he might be yelling, and he might be preaching from the pulpit saying, I am God, and you may be just missing him because we've made assumptions about God and we just want to go on with our life. But I'll tell you what, the Bible says that Jesus Christ coming is the fullness of time, the apex of time. That means the reason your watch ticks forward is because of Jesus. The reason you have time itself, the reason you can look at your watch and see it going clockwise, the reason you need a clock is because of him. And that clock is ticking and inching forward, 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 forward. And that's what the Christmas season is all about. We are remembering a time where we had to look in anticipation for a guy named Jesus, that he would come one day and he would reconcile us and our sins would fall off of us and we would be in a right relationship with God, no longer having to enter a weird tabernacle to get to God, but getting to God through Jesus himself. And here's the craziest part, John chapter 1, verse 14. And the word, the logic, became flesh and he dwelt among us. We preached on this last fall. The word dwelt here literally means to pitch a tent, to be a tabernacle, to be a booth. The book of John is intelligently designed. This is not just written down. This is intelligently designed by a creator. And what God did here was he left a clue for us so that when we got to chapter 7 and we read the Feast of the Booths, we go, wait a second. If I read this in the original language, I know that these are the same word. What is he saying? That yes, at one time we needed a tabernacle, at one time we needed a temple where we could temporarily have access to God, where we could temporarily meet God and we could be purified and cleaned as long as we followed the Sabbath law. He's saying here that those temples were always temporary and that the permanent temple would one day come. And the Logos would come to the world and dwell amongst his people. No longer do you have to go to God, God comes to you. That's Jesus Christ in this season. Let's pray.